Hello and welcome to the Poor Hammer Podcast, episode 78. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
How's your hangover going?
It's mostly gone.
So we're recording this episode very far in advance because I'm on vacation. We're recording this a mere day and a half after we recorded the last episode, which was 5.5 hours long and went until 2 in the morning. We're mostly sane.
I don't know if that's ever actually true, but as good as it's gonna get.
So there was one final question that we didn't cover last time.
Well, I mean, there were a few that we didn't cover.
But they all sucked. You weren't in the final cut. Your question must have sucked, and you should think about that fact when you try to go to sleep tonight.
It's either that or it was an episode that we've already got in the pipeline.
But there was one last question, which was, what is it like having Brad come to you half the time with solid, great episode ideas, and half the time he's just like, man, fuck it, we'll do it live?
I mean, at least half the time it's good enough.
So speaking of we'll do it live, we're a bit too early to have any episode stuff prepared. So how about we take the most popular question from last time and do a full episode and a more thought out answer to it?
Yeah.
So without any further ado, let's have a deep argument about which factions belong in 40K.
Sounds good.
So on the episode last week, when we answered the question, I gave the easy out of Exodites because I want dinosaurs. I still support Exodites as my answer, at least the very short version of it.
And similarly, like Skaven, solid options.
Yes, that's a famous one from importing a Warhammer fantasy army to 40K. Skaven is always the most popular missing one. I'd argue it's probably more popular than several that are in 40K.
Likely.
So this gets into the question of what is 40K from an abstract standpoint with the list of factions, like as a game.
This is a sci-fi setting kind of thing.
It's a sci-fi setting using specifically races that are typically found in fantasy tropes.
It's very Tolkien-esque fantasy ripoff stuff going on.
But there is the addition of a couple blatant ripoffs of sci-fi as well, like the Xenomorphs becoming a faction in the Tyranids.
Yeah.
And there's the obvious internal ones in the Imperium where you've got Sisters of Battle and stuff where you can point to where they ripped them off from Dune and all of that.
There's honestly a pretty good diversity of separate ideas all stuck in humans but kind of category where it's like humans aren't just one-dimensional. They've got all of these separate facets, but each of those facets are its own faction, essentially.
Yes, whereas most of the non-human species didn't get that love and attention to how they're set up and are a one-dimensional cartoon, Tolkien-esque, this is the trope that this race represents.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's fine, but I feel like there's a decent number of human factions that could have been more interesting if they were non-humanoids.
Yes. And actually, I'm not even saying we should be moving them out of humans into another faction. I just want to see the expansion of the non-human empires into something three-dimensional and interesting.
Yeah, but if you want to expand elves into, not just like light elf, dark elf, random elf.
Native American elf.
You've got this like, okay, what's the culture that you're trying to actually like put together in it? And you kind of like look at it and you're like, well, if we want to make it this like religious zealot kind of culture, then hey, look, there's some of that going on with humans already. So what's the like, there's definitely ways that you can do it, but what's the difference on the tabletop? Like, at the end of the day, there is a game that needs to be played.
There needs to be a difference on the tabletop. At the same time, there tends to be a checklist. If you're going around looking at most Imperium factions that aren't knights.
Yeah.
Most of them have a checklist of things they have to fulfill, at least from a war standpoint. Not so much for lore, but...
Yeah, you've got your troop, your tanks, your transports, your heavy gunners.
And you can have exception cases, things like knights. But one of the things that I'm looking at with the introduction of Exodites is the creation of an overarching faction in Eldar. So you've got humanity, you've got chaos, which desperately needs work.
It's got the general ideas that it can spread further.
Yes. And then you've got literally everybody else who is a one-dimensional, one-note, 5 books total for the faction list.
Yeah.
This could be solved to some extent if Eldari was expanded out to be an Imperium or Chaos-sized conglomerate of armies. And lore-wise, they were moving toward this with the Ynnari storyline of even Drukhari must work with the Asuryani so that the Eldari can survive.
I do feel like there's potentially more opportunity with Tau. This is something that I'm not fully versed on. I'm sure you know more of the lore, but there are like models that exist that are part of that coalition.
Correct. For an external person standpoint, the Tau are essentially the Covenant. They're the multi-alien faction that's a bunch of weaker species grouping together to be one whole. Now, this would be a wonderful 4th major power. So you have humanity, you have chaos for evil humanity, because humanity has to double dip on importance. Then you've got Eldari, where you would add in Exodites. You would then have the Ynnari acting as a Imperial agent style overarching faction thing. And then you've got the 3 big ones in Harlequins of the Craft World, the Drukhari, the Exodites, and the Harlequins.
Right.
That would be the 3rd pillar, and then you could make a 4th pillar be Tau, where you go, the Tau are the smallest and weakest empire.
They're basically everybody else trying to survive.
Yes, and they make up themselves, Vespids, Kroot. I know there's other ones that don't have models that people point out.
Which one's the snake people?
They're part of Drukhari, actually. Slith.
Oh yeah, they are, aren't they?
They're a mercenary race thing that just work with Eldar.
Yeah.
Oh, and Eldar also have the Corsairs, who we could argue into the Ynnari-style bridge faction.
Yeah.
But on the Tau standpoint, then you would flesh out probably 2 flavors of Tau. One to be more army-esque, one to be more battlesuit-focused, just to get some internal flavor between the different ways they fight.
It would definitely be like you've got the battlesuit section that's like, they're the elite army that's trying to hold everything together. And then you've got all of the others that are like, yeah, they have a few elite sections, but not enough to field a full army that can fight on a galactic scale.
And then you've got the ability to add in a dedicated Kroot army that is smaller in scope, or you make them part of the non-battlesuit focused part of the army, like that's more fire warriors and stuff. And then you would have Vespids go into a category, whether they be group with other auxiliaries or if you want to put them with like the battle suits or something, but you want at least like, we'll say 3 armies within the Tau Empire, but possibly more. And this is where you can put your totally not Skavens if you were to add them to the setting. If you've got an idea for a wacky species, you could throw them in here.
Honestly, I feel like at a certain point, things like Skaven or spider crab thingies.
I actually don't know what you're talking about.
Really? Maybe it's not Warhammer then. I'm pretty sure it was in one of the, because it was talked about with one of the void ships that had like one of the big computers.
One of the Votann computers?
No, like an actual artificial intelligence from like way...
One of the Votann computers? Those are those. But are you talking about an STC?
Maybe?
Or a Men of Iron?
Maybe?
Okay. You don't know what these things even are.
No.
Yeah, you know a random Xenos race. What do you know it from?
I'm pretty sure I saw it when I was trying to look into trying to figure out what the hell happened to all the AIs and stuff. But these are them. And I remember seeing their like picture art and going, wow, that's like neat. Maybe they're all just old and dead. I don't know.
I'm reading right now to see what the fuck they're from. Wow, this is like, these exist. There's a lot of words on this page. Eric found something I don't know in lore. What happened?
Yeah, it's the Archaeotech caches or something like that. That's where I found them from.
Oh, they're from Rogue Trader. Oh my god, they're very old.
And I was like, fuck if I know what that's from. I went down a rabbit hole at one point, and this is what I found, and I thought they were cool.
They're from the RPG. It came out in 2012. So these are newer lore, but they're part of the Rogue Trader RPG. Okay.
It can't be that old. The like character design is like, maybe that's just all fan fiction.
No, that's it. So they're from the Rogue Trader RPG. Okay. So they exist. You found something on a wiki. Congrats.
Hey.
So yeah, you could have something like that. I haven't read this to figure out if they would never align with Tau or something, but...
So I think these ones are more like chaos, except they don't actually worship chaos.
Are they just warp entities?
I don't know, dude. The thing is I don't actually know enough about how the warp works. All I know is that these guys are supposed to just like randomly pop up out of the void.
Okay.
Sounds like warp shenanigans to me.
Sure. So at least we found something that should exist. So you could add them to the list of things that could be added to the game. Whether they go with Tau or would be unaligned to anybody, which at that point I've got to put a hang on there.
Yeah.
Let's not make our problem we're trying to solve a bit worse.
But at the same time, I feel like there is large potential for void warp related things that are not just the 4 chaos gods and not just humans.
Very true. You could have more warp oriented species that are not, chaos demons. I actually think in 30K, or the deep lore before 30K with the Dark Age and all that stuff, was the first warp entities were not demons. They were like random monstrosities that would later become solidified as the demons.
Okay.
But they were like enslavers or something where it would be like something that just comes and takes over a planet or something and whisks people away.
All right. I mean, yeah.
So yeah, you could go that route and have them be some other warp-focused, non-chaos faction, if that is what they are.
But, I mean, it's just one of those that, like, another option kind of thing. Because when you brought up Skaven, I feel like I don't know if Skaven would work with the Tau Empire.
Skaven don't work with anybody.
Yeah.
Skaven are the ultimate, why am I trusting the literal rat?
Yeah. He's called the Deceiver. I wonder what he does.
But that gets back into Chaos, though, and Chaos could be more filled out. Chaos is missing at least Dark Mechanicus and Rebel Guard, Traitor Guard, Heretics, whatever you want to call them.
Just like normal random people that are part of the...
Normal humanity that went to Chaos instead of going to the Imperium.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you've got like their equivalent of armies. And neither of those exist in 40K currently. I know originally Traitor Guard was a thing that then got Legends. Dark Mechanicus is something that obviously would have to have waited for AdMech to finish up so that you can do the Chaos thing where you just take the Imperium models and paint them and then add, a extra sprue of spikes to put on them.
Oh, imagine if Chaos got it first.
Oh, if we got Dark Mechanicus before Adeptus Mechanicus.
It'd be hilarious.
Oh man, Imperium players would have been insufferable. But, so those two could exist in Chaos without any extra lore required or anything. Obviously, EC, Emperor's Children could exist as a standalone faction, and then we could get into the whole, should there be a CSM Undivided, and should there be 4 god books that have the demons plus that god, with then just some soup rules?
Right. And, I mean, I think that that's the way it's supposed to go. That allows you to have a bit more variety into the chaos side without actually bloating things too much, because that is one of the problems, is like there's a lot right now, so adding more is like maybe that's tough.
And then you have Vastor go hang out more with Dark Mechanicus. Be'lakor tends to be the Chaos Undivided demon man who makes you get all the demons together. And you could have a nice, more fleshed out Chaos that way. So that it's not literally a bunch of armies that are Space Marines with spikes, one that's Knight with spikes, and then the demons that are on loan from AOS.
Yeah. And when you were talking about setting up Eldari as like another pillar, and it's like, yeah, I guess technically Chaos is a pillar at the moment, but it's on real shaky ground.
Yeah, it's a lore pillar. It's not so much a gameplay pillar.
Yeah, like it is, but it really needs some plaster to fill in some of those cracks.
Yeah, and so then you could fill out Chaos like that. You add Exodites, polish some stuff up, fix up Harlequins a bit, and you have your Eldari Empire. We've got 3 major pillars. We could build up Tau a bit. Votann is one that I'm interested in what I would do in this case.
So one thing that I kind of would like to have added is more of an AI type race, something that's...
So you link that to be the Votann and Tau thing?
And I think that that would fit with Votann to a certain point, just from like, oh, they had access to all of the old tech. Maybe they've decided to continue and have actually figured stuff out.
That's what the Votann is their AI.
Are they actually AI?
Yeah. The whole joke is the Imperium is allied somewhat with the Votann because they're semi-human, demi-human, whatever, right?
Yeah, they were from humanity
Which is a whole argument of, are they really, or were they just aliens that happen to be close enough that they didn't want to fight them?
It's way for the Inquisition to be like, yeah, maybe we don't want that fight at the moment.
Yeah, but they've got their Dark Age of Technology AI still that are the Votann, which are like the big computers that are running super slow nowadays because they've been, run for who knows how many thousands of years.
Okay.
But their societies exist around them. And I'm only saying this from my blurbs when they first were launched. I haven't read any of the Votann stuff in the Codex yet.
Okay.
And they don't have a book series yet, though they could really use one.
And you can't really bank on any of the squat stuff, so... Yeah, it's just one of those that, like, I feel like there's a good opportunity for more computer-based AI cultures at the very least. Whether that actually, like, how that plays out on the tabletop, there's a bunch of different options.
And from an Imperium standpoint, lore-wise, that means you have Imperians fight against Chaos on one end of things. And then you go, why don't they team up with Tau, Votann, whoever else you put into this part of it? Well, the Imperium hates AIs and doesn't trust computers, and now you have a different angle to have a different fight going on. And then you go, why don't they team up with the Eldar? And you go, elves are pricks.
Yeah, well, and the elves were the big bads of the universe, and now they're on the decline, and humanity's taking over, kind of thing. So it's like, do you really want to play nice with them so that they grow again?
Yeah. Then we've got, so Votann I would then put in the Tau area, which is interesting. So like lore-wise, they're supposed to be the bridge between Imperium and Tau.
And I could kind of see that.
The Votann trade with other empires like the Tau. In old Tau lore, they hinted at squats being something that they traded with through some other name for like an unknown auxiliary. Oh, that's it. They were an unknown auxiliary from Tau's angle that had Tau tech, but we didn't have any models for them. But then from the Votann side, we just trade with the Tau because it's advantageous and they've got better tech than the Imperium.
Yeah.
So that would actually work well for why they're in the same bucket. But they're supposed to be the like, oh, they're human, sort of, so the Imperium doesn't straight out fight them, which might be good to have them in a different bucket, but with ties, so that you have, a little bit of ability to cross the line in lore when you need something interesting to happen, so it's not the same book 100,000 times.
Well, and I mean, I think that is one of those, like, there opens up potential for allies that are, at least in the short term, you could see the Votann kind of, like you said, bridging the gap with Tau and the Imperium against a Tyranid invasion.
Yeah, and while I'm not a fan of soup, and in general, I think outside of Chaos, where the soup makes lore sense more than the individual factions do right now, I find soup to be an issue. There was in...
Gameplay-wise, yes.
Yes, from a gameplay standpoint. Lore-wise, cool as fuck. I get it.
Right.
But while I feel that way, 8th edition and previous edition had the whole table of allies where you could have, it's like situational allies, desperate allies, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That could be in play if you were looking for some narrative soup.
When it comes to, like, the gameplay balance for these types of things, there's ways to do it for narrative, and you just don't for, like, match play. Like, the match play rules would be, like, the general outlook of these factions. They're not allies.
This could get into the deleting army thing.
Yeah.
I know that many people, including you, are not the biggest fan of Knights as a standalone faction.
It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, it's cool.
It makes lore sense for Imperial Knights and stuff. But what you would do in that case, maybe, is once Dark Mechanicus exists, is you roll Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights into their Mechanicus equivalents.
All right, yeah. And, like, flesh it out a little bit more, and also have the ability to, like, balance them with other things.
Yes, you can have other aspects to the army that is not just a bunch of knights. And that could help Mech in particular, who is a tech faction without any cool robots.
And at the same time gives you, like, yeah, you can actually field some of these cool robots, but at the same time they're balanced around being large robots, and it's not like We had to balance these so that you could technically play them.
Yes, we don't have to break the game so that knights can play solo anymore. We can say, you're supposed to take a couple troops with them. I'd be okay with that, even though it's not my direction I would take things. That's something where, if that was a side effect, it would probably please a lot of angry people, and to be honest, most people who play knights or whatever are already into, like, ad mech equivalents, so it's not much of a loss to us to just start grabbing some other models that are tangentially related.
Yeah.
And even within Knights players and stuff, like, we know it's a super slant faction that it would be nice if it wasn't so painful to play against, especially for newer players, stuff like that.
And, I mean, I think the thing is like, so long as it stays as a, like, centerpiece kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, you can play it. It's big and chonky and is scary, but it's not just that kind of thing. Like, there's some support going on for this one large model.
In a similar way to in IG, you can technically play mono tanks and not touch a single troop. But will you? Probably not. You're probably, even in a tank-oriented list, going to take, 3 10-mans to play objective game a bit more.
That's kind of the way to do things generally, but, like, if we do this fleshing out, there's still the outliers.
Yes, there will still be standalones. You've got Tyranids with Genestealers, which is its own thing.
Yeah.
It's a great thing from a lore standpoint already. The great alien external threat that everybody has to stop what they're all bickering about to deal with.
And I think that, like, you can add in a few of the chitinous style models to the Tau coalition. So it's not just like, you want to play bugs, you have to play Tyranids.
Oh yeah, you're saying, like, if your Rak'Gol actually worked lore-wise to be part of the Tau coalition or whatever, or we just make up a new alien race to be that.
Or just make up something new that's like, oh, they've got a handful of models.
Sort of like Slith randomly existing.
Exactly. Because it is one of those that, like, Tyranids are awesome, but Tyranids and Genestealers is a pillar on its own. It's good enough. You don't need more to it. You can add more models for those individual things, but more cultures and factions are unnecessary.
Yeah, and Necrons I think you leave alone as the undead / the dead race.
I feel like there could be a bit more for what they do with the shards.
Sure, they don't need an external addition in any way. All you would do, if you wanted to grow them, you would add more Canoptics. You would add more Destroyer variants. You would add a previously unmentioned couple of tiers of warrior casts, and you would branch them out internally like that. You're not adding anything there. Same with, like, Orks. If you were to do anything with Orks, it would be you grow up the Grot side of things into, like, a Gloomspite Git style. You've got Orks and you've got Grots as two sub-armies you can play within Orks, and then Orks have their tri-prong, the old ways, the junkyard, and me and the boys.
So, as much as fleshing out these pillars and factions is good, sometimes you do need these more mono-focused, singular identities kind of thing. Orks are orks.
Absolutely agree. Orks doesn't need anything. All you would need is, if you were to expand Orks and you wanted them so that you've got, everyone's got multiple factions.
Yeah.
You would do another 5 Grot kits and make it so that you could play mono Grots as a separate army if you wanted.
But there's no realistic need for Orks or Necrons to team up with anybody in a culture type gameplay or whatever it is.
No, you can handle that with narratives, like Blood Axe is working with other species, Necrons teaming up for opportunity reasons.
It's fine for those factions to be, this is what they are.
And that would give you 4 strong pillars, and then Tyranids acting as a pseudo-5th, even though it's only 2 factions.
They're kind of like the external threat.
Yeah, and then you've got your 2 big solo ones of Necrons and Orks, which is a pretty good basis. To me, the big thing is I really want Eldari to feel like an Imperium. So much of the lore is focused only on the Imperium, and there's a lack of interest when everyone's on the same team.
Yep.
When you look at 40K lore stuff, it's like, we've got all of these cool armies. 90% of them are all, woo, God Emperor.
Yeah.
There's as many Space Marine chapters as there are ideas for any other faction combined.
Right. And I think the fact that you, of all people, are trying to advocate for fleshing out space elves kind of shows that, like, yeah, they should have more options. It all exists. It's all possible there.
I am challenging you, GW, to make me a fan of elves. I say this as a man who plays Drukhari. I want to be impressed with the lore behind Eldar.
Yeah.
Currently, that ain't it. Necrons is better off currently, and they're a single faction. You could argue they're the same size empire, but they're a single faction compared to, you know, the 2.5 right now of Eldar.
Right. And I mean, I think that there is still a good amount of things that you can do. And at the same time, you don't have to make it just boring elves. Like, we're in space. Like, we can do some more interesting things than what Tolkien did.
We have elves on dinosaurs already established in the setting, and they're not being utilized.
Right.
We have elves that are the edgy theater kids who worship a literal living god who is a massive troll, and they're not being utilized.
Yeah, there's a lot of tropes to, like, the fair folk of, like, just kind of being annoying little pricks to normal life, and just there's so much lore through the ages, essentially, of those types of things, and it doesn't have to just be pulling from your European cultures. There's a bunch of really interesting stuff that you can grab from the, like, Southeast Asia area of these types of things, and then just put an elf skin on it, call it good.
Getting into the Southeast Asia thing, then we're getting into more of like what Tao's thing with the whole pseudo-India, we could argue where Tao's main cultural impacts come from, whether it be India, Japanese art styling, sprinkling of a couple others I've heard argued.
Right.
I almost feel like elves shouldn't go that far in that direction, and instead you stick them with the more European Exodites being more like Native American-esque, not trying to ruin their surroundings type thing that they've got going. Keep them that direction. Then if you wanted to expand something more into an Asian theming, Southeast Asia, that type of stuff, you could go more towards what we fill out in Tao's section. Although then we also have dwarves in there, which are usually considered pretty Germanic and stuff.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, the thing is with what we've kind of put with the Tao section, it would just be everybody else trying to survive, so you can put substantially different cultures together, and there's a bunch of fun fiction that you can write about internal politics.
Yes, that's one of the main reasons I want to do this, is there is more fun when all of the factions that aren't human aren't one note.
Yeah.
And you can talk about the great internal politics beyond, here's this faction, and the one outlier that goes, man, my faction is corrupt, Farsight. When you've got something more interesting and complicated than that second grader writing their first ever essay.
Yeah, and it's just one of those that there are still gaps on the tabletop that can be taken advantage of in some of these pillars. I mean, the Imperium's pretty good, but I mean, even they could use the actual AdMech, essentially.
But that's where you get into, like, updating ranges within, which is less about the factions. The Imperium is pretty well thought out and three-dimensional in that way, compared to everybody else.
And there's enough options that can be taken advantage of that it's not just going to be like an overwhelming amount of models kind of thing, because there is a point where you're just like, okay, we've got 7,000 models for Imperium, we've got 7,000 models for Chaos, we got 7,000 models of elves, we got 7,000 models of just random shit, and it's like, well, okay, maybe pull back just a little bit.
I'm not even that worried about rules bloat. If they go with as simple of rules as they have in 10th, I'm concerned about the opposite issue of not enough interest than I am about, oh no, how does Magic the Gathering keep track of 25,000 Magic cards when my average 40K data sheet has been reduced to that?
Yeah, that's true.
We could use some more kits.
That is true, that is true.
But not in Space Marines. Anywhere else. Literally anywhere else.
They've more or less figured that part out, and it really is like the non-human sections need more.
I do hope, I know there was rumblings that there was internal memos or investor call comments about increasing the amount of Xenos boxes due to overperforming sales or something over the last couple of years. I'm hoping that is them realizing that when you make your factions not one-dimensional cartoons, that people don't require you to play the Imperium.
Yeah.
If you actually put the money down and you say, make Necrons a real faction in lore, and then you put the money down and you say, also give them a range update so that they look good, everyone is a fan of Necrons suddenly, starting with 9th edition. It's amazing.
Wow. Whoever would have thought that when you actually like flesh out non-human things, people can still have interest in it.
I'm never going to say it will have as much as humans.
That's the default. It's also just the easy. You don't have to learn so much. There's some basic assumptions that you can make. It's a human, so I understand I'm a human. They're not going to be quite the same, but I don't need to dig through so much lore to figure out what this random mushroom that grew up into a angry green thing is trying to figure out.
You say that, but I almost feel like human butt style factions are in that you must have humans thing of like orcs, humans, but green and dumb. Tau, humans, but blue and smart. Elves, humans, but pointy ears and dick. Dwarves, humans, but short and like mining.
Necrons, humans, but robots.
Humans, but dead.
Yeah.
Which gets in the whole Necrons are pretty much just the undead necromancer. They fall rules-wise under the more fantasy battles, vampire type. You know, you've got a couple key characters and all the undead minions that are non-ending waves, right?
Yep.
And then people will argue lore-wise they're more like Tomb Kings in space, which is great because Tomb Kings are actually interesting, unlike Old Crowns, which have no lore and are just Tyranids but metal.
Yeah, I do think that I would be interested in more unique models. You know, like that's why the Rak'Gol interests me.
Yeah, something that's not just a bipedal dude, but here.
They're unique models, and they're not just the Tyranid swarm. There's something new. There's something interesting there. I hope more of that type of thing happens at the very least. Like, even they should flesh out Eldari. They should flesh out Tau, and they should do some more with Chaos. But
I think those are all slam dunk obvious points.
But I really, really just want actual like alien biology going on.
Yeah, and Tyranids is a great faction.
Yeah.
But it's one type of alien.
Right.
We could use 2 more Tyranids, if that makes sense, where, like, Tyranids are the bug xenomorph ones. How about we go for creepy Cthulhu ones, although they kind of do that with a couple mediocre spaghetti faces that they call squid faces, but at this scale they tend to just make it look like those Play-Doh press spaghetti things.
Well, and it's one of those that, like, I feel like there's a decent amount of, like, some of the designs for Tyranids are like, wouldn't it be cool if we had this design? And it's like, well, where do you put it? Well, right now, the only option is let's mold it a little bit differently and call it a Tyranid.
Yeah, and they all end up with the same chitinous look. But if you wanted to have a race of bird people, I mean, that gets into Tzeentch's whole bird thing, but then you could have it where there are ones who are aligned to Tzeentch, and you've got some weird flavor thing and narrative campaign.
There's so much potential.
Bring me Lizardmen, goddammit. Bring me Skaven.
I mean, to a certain point, you can do basically anything. You can make just about any idea an interesting model. It's just so much easier to do human butt.
Yeah, which you can have that be 80% of the models is human butt. I'm still fine with that. But yeah, the adding on, if we're adding new things that don't fall under any of these pillars we've talked about, go wild.
Yeah, like really start digging into, you know, old folklore. Try and figure out what random small tribe had said that they thought of something weird when they were smoking something. Like, figure out what's going on with that. See if it's something that you can do interesting. There's so many options in human history. Hell, you can make your own completely new thing, but that's difficult. So I'm saying, you know, start easy.
So I'm saying, do what GW has always done. You're British. Do what comes naturally. Steal from other cultures.
Go find some of those other cultures and start stealing things that are not human butt.
And on that note, I think we've wrapped up the topic.
I think so.
All right, that does it for us this week. I'm on vacation. Hopefully this all got out to all of you, and y'all loved it. I'll see everybody when I'm back. Let's get out of here for the week.
Sounds good.